I'm gonna approach this like if this was a jury, right? So if this was a jury, I can do two things, right? I can assume the jury's gonna struggle with, is he guilty, is he not guilty? The jury's gonna struggle with, was it a red light or was it a green light? The jury's gonna struggle with, did this accident cause this injury? Or I can just, now I have the opportunity to say, jury, what do you want to do?
You mentioned earlier about the importance of building relationships with people in the medical field. Do you see any potential downsides to, so like when you're making someone whole in the law, a lot of that's going to be involved looking at bills and seeing how much money was spent on their treatment.
Sure.
Do you worry that those relationships can create like a conflict of interest where you send them to these doctors, they jack up the bills because they know there's going to be a lawsuit, and then it can make more money on the end? Is that like a potential risk?
So if it jacks up the bills and if it makes more money on the long run, then that is in my client's best interest because my client gets more money. So you might be a natural born insurance defense lawyer. So, you know what I mean? Because you're looking at it from the other perspective. That, like, one of the things I'll suggest is that you guys have other people come to talk to you, right? They will have a different opinion about some of the things that I might say. So I think that's a great question. And I think that if somebody from Cranfield Sumner was here, or Walt Rapp was here from his firm, or any, well, you know Walt Rapp?
No, I work at Cranfield.
Okay, well, there you go. They might have a different, you're like, Dee Dee's on the phone there, I'm sure, listening.
No,
I'm just kidding.
not this time.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so my point of it is that they might have a different opinion, but there's no conflict of interest. The question is, I think another question is there an ethics issue, right? Am I like artificially inflating bills? And I can tell you we are not. What we're doing is we are asking our clients early on, like we have, most people will have, young people that maybe used to be hostesses in restaurants, being in their intake department. We have people who have extensive law enforcement experience. And so those people are used to investigating accidents of all kinds, wrecks or, fires or whatever, And so those guys know what questions, and also they're trained, right? We have scripts and they have trained, and we collaborate on that process. How can we do this better? And so what they're going to do is they're going to ask them about what hurts, if it does hurt. It's not our job to say you're making it up, but we have a specific provision in our contract that says if at any point we feel like you are saying something that's not true, or trying to defraud somebody, or trying to exaggerate your injuries, we can and will get out immediately of your case. And it says that in every one of our representation agreements.
After the case settles, don't the medical providers that they use cut the bill?
So it depends on the circumstances. So after a case settles, our job. So the way that we look at our cases is every case is a business, right? And so in every business, we want to maximize revenue and we want to minimize expenses. So we want to maximize the revenue of the case, and then we want to minimize the expenses in terms of the cost. The costs are going to be how much it costs for the treatment, and then also the expenses of the case, right? And so yeah, we will try to negotiate those bills down, and so from an evidentiary perspective, in North Carolina, the jury's going to hear how much. If the bills are reduced, they're going to hear, how much they're responsible for paying back. They're not going to hear that the people have to pay attorney's fees out of that. They're not going to hear that we got $20,000, $50,000, $200,000 in experts that we had to pay. They're not going to hear about those types of things. So the jury doesn't always hear the whole picture, but the idea is they hear enough of it to make a fair and impartial decision. It's not a perfect process by any means. And really, most cases don't go to trial. Most cases, probably 10% of our cases are in litigation. The rest of them resolve. And if they're built correctly, most of them, 90% of them should resolve. Because my experience is that the best insurance companies and the best insurance defense lawyers are not necessarily, I'm not a natural born insurance defense lawyer. Like I did that for, in summer one time, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Like I was with people who celebrated paying somebody who was hurt, like an old lady who was hurt in an accident, like a tiny amount of money, and high-fived each other around the office. And my reaction was, check please, I gotta get out of here. I couldn't for that summer because I had an apartment and a dog and obligations, you know, but I was like, I will never be in this situation again. And so then when I got out, I started a firm, and then I was able to work with people directly, people that nobody had ever fought for before, and people who were marginalized for all kinds of reasons. And I felt like I helped them. And then that became a passion for me.
As a personal injury law firm, I'm assuming most, if not all, of your cases are held in civil courts. How does that intersect with the criminal court? I know a lot of times wrecks do result in criminal charges, like unsafe lane movement, things like that. Does your firm also represent your clients in those cases? Or in what kind of ways does your firm intersect with criminal law?
Well, so we don't do any criminal law at all. You know, we don't do traffic or any of those kinds of things. So when that happens, we represent the victim of some kind of situation like that. So what we'll do is communicate with the DA's office and say, we represent this person. This person was a victim in a crime. So please don't resolve this case without our input. Mm-hmm. And most of the DAs will respect that. I don't know if that's for everybody or for when I got out of school. So I went to school, and I watched To Kill a Mockingbird and read the book, and I was like, I want to be this guy, right? This is what I want to do. There's people that can't fight for themselves, and I want to be somebody who does fight for them. And so I started in criminal defense, and that's what I did for a very, very long time. So I kind of grew up with all those guys down there at the courthouse, Drew Lewis and Barrett Temple and Ben David and all those guys.
I interned there right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and Lance and all those guys. I mean, we kind of grew up together. Now we were on different sides, right? They were trying to put my guy in jail, or they would have a different perspective. They're representing the community, which as a citizen I appreciate very much. And multiple times over the years, we have butted heads, and then I later thought, wow, I'm sure glad those guys do what they do. Jason Smith and all, and so, but there were times when we would butt heads, but they're all professionals, they're all pros, and then we would, remain friends afterwards, and even though they're trying to do their job to the best of their ability, and I'm trying to do my best to the job to the best of my ability.
I have a following question.
Sure, yeah.
That kind of. So, a lot of times, so I actually work in district court, and I'm the one speaking to a lot of the victims and witnesses of these traffic incidents whenever it leads to criminal charges.
Sure.
And honestly, majority of the time, the witnesses there are like, why am I here? This happened about 2 years ago. So is that kind of firms like yours communicating with the DA's office and having us speak to these people, even though it has been several years since that case? Or is that just us?
Usually I would think our stuff is going to be quicker. Our stuff is probably going to be, and that happens rarely. You know what I mean? It's like most of the time we can document pretty clearly that, like, I wouldn't need that in a speeding ticket. I wouldn't need that in an unsafe movement. There's going to be a collision report. It's going to have pretty clearly, where it happened and the weather and the location, the direction and the impact and the investigating officer and the witnesses and all those kinds of things. So I don't really need that. Usually I can take the information off that report and include it in my stuff and be able to do what I need to do. Now, the exception might be an impaired driving offense. So, if somebody's drunk and they hurt somebody, then that gives rise to a whole new level of damages, punitive damages. There's other exceptions too. If there's some type of criminal act that results in somebody getting hurt, for example, DWI, a dram shop, where a bar is then responsible for over serving somebody before they get in an accident. Or, there might be a bar that security is not functioning properly and according to their own regulations, and a drunk person is belligerent and then injures somebody else. And these are sort of more serious things and more out of the ordinary types things. So on occasion we will do that. And I think usually those people will, out of courtesy, contact somebody in my office and say, here's what we're going to do. And we'll say, okay, that sounds great. I appreciate you letting us know. We just don't want to be in a situation where they can't get in touch with our client for whatever reason, or they can't, do the things they need to do to prosecute their case. Because if they prosecute their case and secure a conviction, then that helps me, right? That shows, from my perspective, that, and most of those people would know that that I'm not going to be involved in a case that's not legit. So your reputation over time becomes important for those reasons.
We do pay insurance co-pays too. Well, not every time, but we do retribution. That's one of the things I always ask for.
Sure, yeah. That's a big part of criminal court, and you can get restitution goes to anything that you can recover in civil court. So yeah, that's good. What else? What else does anybody want to know?
I was just curious, how often do you personally go to court, and are you and is your firm, like, do you guys prefer to avoid going to court? Do you avoid going to court?
So that answer has changed over time. I spent 20 years, I was in court every single day. I tried cases in district court, I tried cases in superior court, I tried cases in federal court, I tried, and also keep in mind, if there are 50 different kinds of lawyers, 4 of them go to court. Family lawyers, criminal lawyers, injury lawyers, civil litigation lawyers. Most of them, there's millions of kinds of transactional lawyers, wills and estate people, all these kinds of lawyers. They might never go to court, or they might go to court very infrequently. So I used to go to court daily. And then I used to have, and like my initial thing was trying cases. So I started a firm right out of school, and so the only way that I was able to get cases is I was to go to different people in town and be like, hey, I'm Clark, I'm new, and they would like grill me or whatever and ask me, what's the rule in Shelley's case or whatever, and I'd try to stumble through that, and then they'd say, all right, well, fine, I'll send you whatever cases I don't want. And so they would send me these cases that were problematic for whatever reason. And also, I didn't really understand at that point in time how to build a case. I didn't have the relationships to get people the treatment that they needed in order to have their best, to be recovered physically, financially, and emotionally. So I would have to. So what would happen is I'd say, and I would think my client they might have a sore back, and I'd be like, this is the most injured client that's ever lived, and I'm going to give this person $1 million, right? And so I'd go, I want $1 million, and they go, we'll give you $100, and I'd go, up yours, and off we go, right? And so I would file a complaint, and every one of my cases initially was in court. I would file it, and then I would be, because I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because I was starting my own shop, right? So everybody else that comes out, they have firms, and they have partners, and they have relationships with a judge. And then when you first start out, especially if you're on your own, there's the defendants, or there's the judge, there's the clerks, there's the DA, there's the big long-standing Buddy Allard kind of criminal defense attorneys who have long history of respect and everybody loves and rightfully so. And then there's sort of lower people on the totem pole, and then there's speeding ticket people and soccer moms that got a speeding ticket, and then there's murder people, and then there's brand new lawyers who don't work for a firm, right? And so that was so like when I come into that environment, I had at that point I'm like, okay, so if that's how this is, I'll fight all of you, So I had a chip on my shoulder, and as a result, I got into a lot of fights. Not fist fights, but like trials. So we have a podcast. The podcast is called The Verdict, and if you watch any of the podcasts, what you'll find is some things that I believe. And I believe that pretty much everything that happens, just sure, a piano could fall out of the sky and land on you and paralyze someone, and that's just horrific. It's bad. Nothing good about that. But most things that happen in our lives that we think are negative end up being blessings. So faith is a big deal to me. That's a huge part of my life, and so I believe that fundamentally. So these things that were ended up being sort of challenges at first turned out to be unbelievable blessings. So there are very few. So like most of the people that if you see somebody on a billboard or on a TV commercial, very few of those people go to court. Very few of those people. I mean, I've been in court every day for 20 years. I can count the number of times I've seen any of those people ever, and it's never been in court. So very few of those people go to court. But because of my personal history, I was in court all the time, and tried cases in front of juries, and have tried, dozens of cases in front of juries, and most of the cases that I've tried involve some pretty serious stuff. I've probably tried 20 cases in front of a federal jury where my client was looking at life or more, and that's a big deal. There's people coming from all over. They might be in Raleigh, it might be in Greenville, it might be in Wilmington, it might be in Fayetteville, Elizabeth City. So those are kind of a big deal. And the stakes are high, right? The stakes are high because there's a person sitting beside you that's going, and maybe they did it, maybe they didn't do it, but you've met, by now you've met mom, you've met Junior, you've met the girlfriend or the boyfriend or whatever. And this is not a person, a two-dimensional person, this is a three-dimensional person. And if you win, they walk out that door. If you lose, they walk out that door. So there's a lot at stake in these cases. So when that happens, it becomes important for you to be, at your best. And so to answer your question, I don't do that anymore. There are occasions when I'm involved in higher value cases. If I would try a case if I needed to, if I see somebody not doing it right, like it's the worst. If you used to try a lot of cases and now you see somebody that's not trying cases the way you think they should be trying cases. It's like, I don't know, if you've played sports growing up, and then you see somebody, playing it differently than you would. It is infuriating. You're just like, so that's my experience now. So now what I do is I lead a team of people who are probably better than I ever was, but still, I do have these sort of glory day memories of the days when I used to do a lot of that. Does that make sense? Who else has stuff?
Speaking of high pressure cases and really connecting with their clients, how did you learn to deal with losing cases because you can't win every single one?
Well, I will tell you that so I did a lot of federal criminal defense, which was a crazy. So when I was in school and I was trying to find an internship, and I wanted to find internships where I was going to be in the courtroom and do courtroom related stuff, and so I had a buddy of mine who was in town, and he was clerking for a federal judge in DC or somewhere. He said, "Why don't you write to this local federal judge and see if you can clerk for him?" So I wrote him, and if they do it up north, they didn't do it down here at that point in time. And so he was like, "Well, I can't pay you." And I was like, "I don't care," And he was like, so I went and clerked for him, and then I clerked for him for a long time, and for the summer, and so I got to know a lot about federal criminal practice and federal, jury trials and those kinds of things from that perspective, from the perspective of the court. And so then when I got out and I started my own firm, he's sort of, usually you have to be 5 years out in order to be able to even apply to be a federal criminal defense attorney. You have to have 5 years of criminal trial experience before you can do that. Well, so because of my experience, let's see, I got my bar results in October, in August. Probably 30 days later, I was picking my first federal jury. So in fact, when I now that I think about it, I called I was like excited, but I was nervous, right? I'm picking a federal jury. The guy was looking at life. He'd been through 4 other attorneys. So I go to see him, and I'm on the way there. I'm kind of like nervous, right? I'm like, it's gonna be Hannibal Lecter in there. You guys know who Hannibal Lecter is that before you know Hannibal? So I'm like, it's gonna be Hannibal Lecter in here, and he's gonna be like chained or gurney or something. So I go there expecting this terrible person, you know, and he's the nicest guy in the world, you know, and so I'm picking this jury within a few days. So I ended up working with a lot of those, and I will tell you that in the Eastern District of North Carolina, there's probably a 98 point something percent conviction rate. So almost everybody that is and so in criminal court, like I remember this girl who's a friend of mine in law school. We had to we came back from our internships, and you kind of share, you collaborate, you say, this is what I did, this, and she was like, you know, I had to get used to losing. I'm like, well, why is that? She's like, well, I tried 100 cases this year and I lost one, you know? It's like, oh, huh, congratulations, you know? But if you work for the DA's office, you're gonna win a lot more than you lose, right? You get to pick if you don't like the case, you can dismiss it, you know? And especially at the federal level. If you don't think you have the evidence, you don't take the case. So you're gonna lose. And that now in my job now, I get to be selective, right? So no fee unless we win, right? You've seen these things in the commercials. So how do I do that? That doesn't make any sense. You know, you don't have to pay any money unless we win. That doesn't make any sense, does it?
Just have to win it.
Well, but here's how, right? So at this point in my career, I can look at an accident report, and I can tell you in 10 seconds if you're gonna win or not. You know, now I can't tell you how much money, because that depends on the medical treatment, and it depends on, you know, all kinds of different things. Future impairment, lost wages, all kinds of different things. You know, but I can usually tell you, and pretty much anybody in my office that works in that area could tell you, hey, yeah, this case has value or no, it doesn't. You know, if there's a significant damage to the car, or if a person has a significant injury in a fall or a dog bite or whatever, and they've gotten treatment, and there's insurance, so it's liability is the first, it's somebody else's fault, there's a source of recovery, and injury, we got a case, you know? So we win. Now, where we would lose is the person's not injured. Like it turns out that they're not injured, or they don't go get treatment, and then they come back a month later and they go, okay, now I'm injured. No, too late. You know, now the insurance company, I mean, the people that she works with I disagree with them fundamentally,
Me too.
but they're really good lawyers. So when they see there's a gap in treatment, they're gonna go bananas. And they're gonna say, if you were injured, you would have gotten treatment. In addition, you have a duty to mitigate. That means it's your legal responsibility to get better as you can, fast as you can. You didn't do that, and now we're not gonna pay you. Or they're gonna pay you much less or whatever. So to further that, after people get injured, a lot of times the insurance adjuster will call them, and they'll say, well, how you doing? You know? And the person will say, hey, my back hurts, and thinking about going to the doctor, and they'll go, and they won't say anything, right? They're not gonna lie to them. But if they were to say that to me, I'll say, if your back hurts, go to the doctor and get checked out, right? That means you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Because if you wait more than a couple weeks, you know, you got a problem, right? I mean, so they don't care. The insurance adjusters will sit back in silence while you make mistakes that will cost you thousands of dollars. But the reality is, I can't control the outcome of a case. So even when I was doing criminal cases, like murder and stuff like, you know, death penalty cases or whatever, that's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother show, is dealing with these criminal cases, because there's a lot going on in those cases. The cases are very involved, lots of witnesses, lots of specialized evidentiary challenges, and when you're working through those cases, you're thinking about you're meeting your client, you're developing a relationship with your client in order to gain trust, and to be able to represent that person effectively. You recognize, you kind of believe in it in the first place because you recognize that nobody is probably, like I remember sitting this, you know, before you go to law school, you're like, things are black and white. You read the newspaper, it's like somebody did something terrible, and you're like, that guy should go to jail or electric chair or whatever, you know? And then, like, I remember this one guy who was charged with some bad stuff, right? Drug dealing and all, you know, all kinds of stuff, right? And he had been convicted, and when you're convicted in the federal criminal process, you have to submit to a pre-sentence report, and they do a pre-sentence interview. They're going to put together a series of information, a list of all the information to give to the sentencing judge, so the judge can determine the appropriate sentence, right? You'll have your criminal history, your work history, your physical history, your medical history, all these different things in it. So 30-page report about your educational background, everything, work history, all of it. And you got to sit for an interview. And so I'm sitting there with this guy, and again, by now we've developed a relationship, which is kind of cool, man. These people, you read something on the news or see something in USA Today, and next thing you know, you're representing somebody who is charged with this thing, and it's strange because you still have compassion for the people who are affected by it. Was a drug dealer, somebody's mom went out and did some kind of drugs and left them at home, and it destroyed the family, and that's horrible, you know. But then you sort of look over here and you go, well, this guy that I'm representing that's charged with dealing drugs, he was a product of that. You know what I mean? It's not like he was in the Phi Delta Gamma fraternity. Sorry? Yeah, there you go. And he just was like, you know what? Hell with it, I'm gonna go sell some drugs this evening. This guy has a lot of times been a product of that exact environment. And so when we were going through the course of this interview, it became very apparent that he says to the interviewer that that his time in this in jail is the first time he had had a bed. And she's like, "You mean your own room?" And he's like, "No, a bed." He's 20 years old and he's slept on couches or the floor or a car or something like that up until now, you know. And there's another occasion, and this was like a Hannibal Lecter guy. Like I had to go see this guy in some obscure jail in the middle of nowhere in the middle of North Carolina. And so I go in to see the guy, right? And they're like, and you got to go through security, and then you got to tell them what you go to see, and they go, well, all right, I'm gonna have to get somebody to take you there. So we go all the way through the thing, down some stairs, and they had made a cell for this guy because he had beat up people and threatened people and all this, and he was a rough cat. In fact, before he had been in jail for this particular situation, he was out of Fayetteville, and he had been released from another thing in Fayetteville, and so when he got released, he didn't have any guns or drugs or anything to make money, so he goes down to the roughest part of Fayetteville. If you ever spent time in Fayetteville, Fayetteville's got some rough parts. You know, that put Fayetteville got, any place in Jersey or whatever, New York. So he goes there. He goes to this most dangerous place, and all the dangerous guys are standing there. It's like who's who in the danger of part of Fayetteville. And then my guy's got no money, no guns, no nothing. He walks up to the biggest one, and he's like, "All right, I need your money and your gun." And the guy's like, So this is the time. So he was like a known, and he was charged with robbing and armed robbing a bunch of gas stations. So I'm like, this guy's being nuts. Again, we ended up being like BFFs. It's a bizarre world. It is a bizarre world. I do that. But what was crazy is, as I got to know him and hear his story, the story of how he was raised, and the abuse that he has suffered at the hands of his father, stepfather, and another stepfather was horrific. It was absolutely horrific. And so, I'm an emotional guy, and so when I'm telling the judge about this, I'm like, I can hardly get it out. I'm like, dude, this thing that has happened, the things that have happened to this kid are unbelievable. And you have to take that into consideration. It doesn't mean he walks free. It doesn't mean he gets a key to the city. But what it does mean is that it feels like to me, at least it's where somebody's got to be there to argue. Judge, you've got to consider this, right? You've got to consider that he has had a different experience than somebody else, you know? And I don't know what to do with that. I'm asking that for that to be reflected in your sentence. But you knew I was going to ask you that anyway. But I'm saying that these circumstances are exceptional, you know? And so, but at the end of the day, the first case that I had when I was picking a jury, 30 days after, the guy ended up pleading guilty. Another lawyer the judge assigned, I went to lunch to get the exhibits, and when I came back, the other lawyer had convinced him to plead guilty, and I was furious. He was also representing him, so it wasn't unethical, but I was furious, you know. It was probably the best thing, you know. I mean, I'd called my criminal law professor, who I was very close to from law school, during, you know, the day before, and I was like, hey, I'm trying a case tomorrow. I'll talk to you. And I went and prepared some exhibits, and I got back, and there was a message on my machine saying, lose my number. You have no business trying this case. You know, I don't, you know, you can't try this case. You're gonna get in trouble. He didn't think I had enough experience to try the case at that point in time. And of course, at that time, I got a chip on my shoulder. I'm like, wait, you know, so I go to try the case, you know, and then this other guy feels exactly the same way. He was one of my mentors, a good friend of mine, and he was like, the guy would have lost, and he would have gone to jail for life. You know, as it stood, he went to jail for 22 and a half years. Now, when that happened, you know, I'm like, that's not what happened in To Kill a Mockingbird. You know what I mean? That's not what happened in The Time to Kill. That's not what happened in my books, in my novels, in my dreams. You know, in my dreams, the guy got off and went home, and we hugged, and everything was great. You know, and so yeah, I was upset. So I got in my 1995 mint green Chevrolet Corsa car, and I drove out into the country for 2 hours, you know, and I thought about it, and I listened to, you know, my music, and I'm like, what am I doing? Did I just cost that guy 22 and a half years of his life? You know, so it's not easy. That part's not easy, you know, and you know, so when you're in the, you know, you've seen this in the arena, you know this, like it's it's a Roosevelt quote. If you haven't, or if you're not familiar with it, you should be, especially if you're going to be in this world, in this world of combat, of not physical combat, but you know, intellectual combat. There's nothing you can do more intellectually challenging and stimulating than a jury trial. Nothing in this world. There is so much going on at one time. You're questioning a witness that's up here. Your client is right here. Your client is doing this. You know, you're like, remember the legal pad, write it down. I'll get to it in a minute. You got the judge in mind. You know what I mean? You're trying to make objections. You're thinking about what you're gonna do next. You got to present evidence. You got to catalog that evidence. There's 100 things going on at the same time. So it is exciting, and it is fun. Like, that is a fun thing to do, you know. But, you know, it can weigh on you, you know. And so, in fact, the way I got into doing what I do now is, I was doing more and more serious criminal defense work, right? And so, when you first start out, you do speeding tickets, and you know, you go to district court, you do speeding tickets, you'll do, and then you'll do, there's shoplifting day, and then you know, you might do fights and stuff. Somebody got drunk at a bar, fights another guy. And then after a while, you start doing felonies, you know, drugs, you know, drug dealing, that kind of stuff. Then eventually you do more serious stuff. You might do sexual offenses and rape cases and those kinds of things. And then eventually you get to where you're, you know, federal court, and maybe you're doing, you know, and then capital murder and all that. So at some point, the longer you get in this game, and the better you are at this game, the more serious cases and the more dangerous the people are. So this was probably in 20, we'll say 15, maybe somewhere around there. maybe probably a little bit earlier than that, maybe 2012. So they call me about representing somebody, right? And this is a guy. This is a gang person who has is in central prison in Raleigh, who has organized a hit on his lawyer's parents and the prosecuting lawyer's parents, you know, and he has done this from central prison during a life sentence. But so when you hear about gangs, you know, when you're in Wilmington, you're like, oh yeah, some gang, it's a fraternity or whatever, it's a club. There are real gangs, like there are real gangs that are like military organizations. They have like rule books and ranks and all this. This guy still had power from doing life in prison in central prison. And so the way that they would communicate with him was they'd come, take a duct tape ball and make a phone and throw it over the thing, and he had a network to get it to him. He would organize his stuff from inside federal, you know, prison. So he'd organize these couple hits, right? And so they called me and wanted me to represent him, and so I'm like, good. Then I get off the phone and I'm like, yes, you know, I'm like, this is what God put me on the earth to do. I'm thinking at this point in my life, and so I mean that's kind of the Super Bowl. It's on the front page of the USA Today and all this, and I'm like, boom, you know, now people are starting to see what's up, and that, you know, so this is great, you know. And I get off the phone and I got little kids out, so I call my wife and I say to her, I say, you know, hey, I'm representing this guy, and we've had different instances in the past where it becomes a security threat. So she's aware. She knows the deal. She knows like there's times when we got to be careful. You know, like some of these guys that she works with, you know, they got to be careful about social media. They got to look around when they're, you know, Tim Severa, he's a federal prosecutor, good friend of mine. We tried a lot of cases together. Great guy, very guy you want in that position to protect us all. But like he's got to be real careful if he's going to dinner. He's like doing like this because he's put a lot of people behind bars, and some of these people are connected. And you know, so I'm calling her and I'm saying, hey, I'm involved in this case, and we've got a 3 or 4 year old. I want you to we're gonna have to take some precautions. You know, we're gonna have to take some precautions. These are the precautions that I think we should take. You know. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, you know, I'm hearing myself say it out loud, and I'm like, I'm not sure that's the best thing for me to do, you know? And so I'm like, let me call you back. And so I think about it a little bit. I pray about it, you know, that's what I do. And I'm like, we'd had another incident a few years ago that I thought was dangerous, where I was up with a chair by the front door, like with a baseball bat and stuff all night long, and I'm like, I'm not going to put my kids in that situation. I love what I do. I love what I do. I love it. I still love it. But I really like that part of my career. But I am not going to subject my kids to that kind of danger. And also my mom lived with us shortly after that. I'm like, I'm not, you know. So I call him back and I said, hey, I told you I would do this. And I'll be involved in this case. I will be involved in this case, but I'm not representing that guy. So I ended up representing somebody much lower down the food chain of this particular conspiracy. And I represented that person, and I went on, and then at the end of that case, I go and I collaborate. I go to a conference, and I collaborate with some mentors. That's always been important to me, collaboration and mentors and all this. And I go with them, and I say to them, man, I'm at a crossroads. I've invested all this time in learning how to do something that I don't feel like I don't want to do anymore, you know? Like, you know, you spend time doing cross. You spend time learning jury selection. You spend time learning how to do opening statements and direct examination and all this stuff. These are incredible skills to have if you're going to make a movie or if you're going to be a criminal defense lawyer. Past that, they're worthless. You know what I mean? So I'm like, what am I going to do? You know, I can't do real estate closings. You know, and so guy says to me, he says, this is a mentor, this guy who's a life coach. I'm big into coaches. I have at least one coach. I have several coaches, but anyway, so the guy goes, he pulls me aside and he goes, all right, well, let's think about it for a minute. He goes, all right, well, let's look back through your career and tell me 3 cases that you had that you felt like you really helped somebody. You really felt like you were a lawyer. And you enjoyed yourself along the way. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, and it was all 3 injury cases. I always did injury cases since the very beginning. I just couldn't get any of them, you know. I always get the third look cases. They'd call guy on the TV, they call the guy on the radio, and then they call me. If that guy said no, they call me. And that's why all my cases went to trial, because they had some kind of problem with them, and I was like, no, I'll take it, And again, that's a blessing, right? So at the time, I'm like, this sucks, man. I'm getting terrible cases. But in reality, what that did is it helped me learn how to build cases out of nothing. So so people would recognize that if I had a case, it had value, So it ended up being a blessing. But I mean, and so then from there I go, okay, well let me try to leverage that. And I'll think about it, and I'm like, well, the skills are transferable. It's all the same stuff. It's going to be an opening. It's going to be a closing. It's going to be jury selection. It's going to be, And so I'm like, yeah, I know how to do that. So let's do it. And so it became a very natural progression. And what was crazy about it is what was crazy about it also is because, remember I told you all these other people that are they never went to court? Now it's like I'm Superman in the sense that like everybody else has got this gravitational pull, but I don't, because everybody in criminal court, no, not everybody, but the real people in criminal court where she is are trying cases. Those are the Buddy Allards, Jeff Hosfords, those guys. Jeff Hosford's my old partner. Phenomenal trial lawyer. I mean, Buddy Allard's phenomenal trial lawyer. People he works with, phenomenal. Barry Temple and all those, great trial lawyers. So Connie Jordan, so.
So something that I thought was interesting that you mentioned about the protections that you need, that's actually something they mentioned during our orientation, is that they suggest that we private our social medias. And I was like, I probably don't need to worry about that. I'm just an intern. Well, the first time I went out after I started interning at the DA's office, somebody yelled at me from across the street and was like, you were yelling at me to sit down in court the other day. And he didn't necessarily do anything to me, but it could have been worse than it was. And just for that to happen the very first time I went out after starting to work there just showed. But also I did have a question for you, which is you mentioned that your firm is very devoted to helping out the community. How does your firm do that? And also with clients that immigrant clients and clients from I'm sorry, I'm losing my words. How do you guys work with them? Do you have people at your office that can speak Spanish fluently?
Sure,
to
yeah,
work with
yeah.
immigrant
So-
clients?
So like our practice is it's funny, in Wilmington we don't have a lot of diversity in the sense that it's a lot of white people. In Charlotte we don't have a lot of diversity in the sense that there's a lot of African American people. You know what I mean? So it's like but we work hard to have a mix of people to relate to the different clients that we might have, and also these groups that I'm in, like I'm in one group in particular, and that group has so there's a lot of females in this but the one thing that we should talk about now, or at a different time is fine, is whether you're going to start your own firm or you can work in somebody else's firm, because that decision matters. There's a big difference between one thing versus the other. Are you going to work in a firm or are you going to work in somebody else's firm? Huge difference. And historically, if you were to ask people, they would think, well, women are probably going to work in a firm. Like if you were to ask 100 people off the street, they're going to work in these officers, going to work in a firm, or whatever, they're going to work for somebody else's firm. The groups I'm in are not like that. The groups I'm in several different groups, one of which is a figure firm. And if you look at a conference that we go to, I mean, there are friends of mine that are women that are badass lawyers and that run unbelievable firms, like $10 million plus firms, and $20 million plus firms. It means their revenue in a year, they might have 80 people in their firms. They might have, and they are phenomenal at running their organization. So just because of whatever your background is, you're either an entrepreneur or you're not, and that is not limited to a particular one group or the other. Any kind of.
I'll just say for you personally, how were you able to decide to start your own firm? And then being younger at the time, how were you able to get the resources and the information necessary to be able to do that?
Also, how did you deal with the debt?
Yeah, both good questions. In terms of what we do for the community, let me finish this and then we'll come back to you, okay? Very good questions. So one of the things we have to do is a podcast, right? And the podcast is designed, so our mission, if you remember, is to help injured people recover physically, financially, and emotionally. That doesn't mean people that live in Wilmington, not people in Charlotte, not people in that are our clients. It means injured people anywhere, you know. So we do this podcast, and we've got 100 episodes out there. We've got probably 100 more that have filmed and not been published. And so one of the ways that we do this is, you know, there are things that I know by virtue of having done this for a long time, and I try to share that with people in the hopes that it'll help them. And then they can avoid making mistakes that will, cost them money and cost them. And then in addition, we do other stuff. We'll do can drives here and do different things, you know, around the community that would be helpful. For years, I've sponsored basketball teams. I even coached, ironically, because I was a terrible basketball player and soccer player. But I did coach, and we sponsored teams for years and years and years and years and years. And then now we have, we're in the process of implementing something where our people will have a certain amount of time every week or month or whatever to go do whatever service they're into. At some point, what we're going to do, and this is part of what we're doing here, is, you know, one of the things that I feel strongly about is I have been all over the world to these conferences, whether it's Tony Robbins or people in my firm, or people in my industry or whatever. So I have learned a lot from these different conferences about, and we haven't even got touched on this, and this is the most important thing. Like if you ask my kids, what's the thing that I would tell them, you know, my legacy to them, it's not about trials and all that. It's about intentionality. It's about like it used to be when I was your age. I'd be sitting in the back of the room, hat on backwards, shorts, regardless if it was 20 degrees outside, and probably hungover, you know, and and so and things happened as they unfolded as they may. That does not happen for me anymore. Everything I do is, so I came here to talk to you, is being filmed because I am going to use it for marketing purposes, you know, and to expand my reach and expand my impact and expand my voice. And so that becomes important as you accomplish whatever you wanted to accomplish in your professional life. Then it becomes a question of, well, what else are you trying to do? Well, for me, one of the things, I had some people that reached out to me early on. I could have gone either way. Reached out to me early on and were very helpful to me. I had this aunt that was phenomenal, and she just did not see the limitations in people she thought they were all artificial. You know, this is Bo's mom, you know, and so he knows some people like me. And so she was one of those people, you know, so like I was on academic probation. I flunked out of East Carolina, which is hard to do. So I flunked out of East Carolina, and I'm at her house over Thanksgiving, right? And I got my girlfriend there, and my family, you know, we pass the corn, and everybody tells something they're thankful for, and puts two things in the corn, and I'm like, I'm thankful for the health of my family, because I am, you know. But I'm still kind of disgruntled because I just got kicked out of school, you know. And so I'm talking to her, and she says, so everybody else has left. They're going off to do something else. My girlfriend and I are sitting there talking to my aunt. And my aunt goes, she goes, well, what are you going to do? And she was going to be a paralegal after school, you know. And so she says, I think I'm going to be a paralegal. She says, what about you? And I'm just like, well, we got jury's still out. We'll see. And she says, well, I think you'd be a good lawyer. I'm like, well, thank you. She's like, no, I really think you would be a good lawyer. And I'm like, well, I appreciate you saying that. And she says, you need to be a lawyer. And I'm like, chill. You know, not everybody in here knows that I just got flunked out of East Carolina, so just take it down a notch, you know. I appreciate what you're trying to say, but, you know, and she's like, I think you should be a lawyer. And I'm like, I don't have good grades. She's like, that didn't matter. And I'm like, well, actually it does. She goes, well, did you know there's a test that you have to take? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, and it counts more than your grades? And I'm like, oh, well, tell me about this test. And she tells me about the LSAT. And I'm like, well, I mean, at the time I drank too much and ran around too much, but I'm good at tests. So I'm like, tell me about this test. So she tells me about the test, and we go to Walden Books in Crabtree Valley Mall, and we get this book, How to Get into Law School. And I read it from cover to cover. So the next morning I wake up with a brand new plan. I go see my buddy, the dean. The dean was a friend of mine because even though I didn't study, I was real involved in all kinds of other stuff and fraternity and all this and fraternity council and all. So had become a friend of mine. So he sat down with me over an hour and helped me plan my whole rest of my college experience. And I never made another beat, So the point is that people invested in me and believed in me when they had no right to do that. That dean spent hours with me, and I was flunked out of East Carolina. What is he going to do that for? So part of my mission is to help reach out to somebody else. You know what I mean? To help other people that came after me. When I started my firm here in town, this kind of goes to where your question. Let me make sure I got it right. It's you're like, how did you start a firm getting out of school?
And how are you able to decide to do that versus working for somebody else?
And then the one,
I just wanted to piggyback on that because
both great questions. Okay, so the summer before, I had worked for an insurance defense firm. Great lawyers. One of them, a couple of them in particular, were like world-class lawyers. But I don't have a passion for helping insurance companies do what they do. I don't. I mean, I respect, some of my best friends do, and I respect them for it. And I don't respect them for it. That's a lie. I respect them as people, but I don't like that work. I don't like insurance companies. I will never like insurance companies. I'll be diplomatic as I can be, but I just don't care for them. But so when I was working there, I realized that. You know what I mean? I just naturally see it from the underdog's perspective. I'm like, who's rooting for, Ivan Drago in Rocky III? You know what I mean? Who's rooting for I'm on the side of the underdog. That's the way I'm wired. And so I'm like, but I was trapped, right? I couldn't leave. I had to pay my rent. I had to take care of my dog, remember? And I had these other responsibilities. And I couldn't leave. And so I'm like, I will never be in that position again, where I have to do what somebody else tells me to do in order to be able to survive. So I started thinking more and more about how I can start my own firm. And I just don't like sharing strategic or ethical decisions with other people. When we started a firm in Charlotte, a friend of mine who's a very, very talented, very successful lawyer in New York. He's also a good friend of mine. He came in with me and we were going to do this. About a month into it, I'm like, Peter, I can't do this, buddy. I got to buy you out, And so I bought him out, and I'm like, we're good friends to this day, but I don't like sharing that. I have a very specific idea, like, my mission, vision, values, which is the most important thing that we have talked about tonight, are with me almost always. Oh, they are with me always. They're on my phone. They're right here. Every one-on-one I have, every meeting I have with anybody, my mission, vision, values are right here. And it tells what we do, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to treat each other and other people while we're doing it. And it is, and I have written goals, and all that stuff is important. But so to answer your question, I had very specific ideas about what I wanted to do, and I did not want to share that with anybody else. And I also, I got a 15-year-old home right now that's very similar to Wired. So if I say, hey, I need you to take out the trash, she's like, and I'm like, take your phone. She's like, I'm gonna do something else. She's like, do it. But if I had just not said anything, she'd have taken out the trash. It's just how she's wired. And I'll be honest with you, that's how I'm wired. Just like when people would say, hey, we'll give you $100 for your case. I'm like, all right, it's on, So there's some people that just have that thing in them that they're like, and now half of my social group is, half of my best friends are not necessarily even in Wilmington. They are, my buddy who lives in Puerto Rico who runs a firm in Virginia. People all over the country that run firms like mine, and they are all the same way. Most people would say that entrepreneurs, people that run businesses, and when you get right down to it, a law firm is not from an entrepreneurial perspective, different from a heat and air business, financial services business, a medical practice, a landscape company, or anything else, any other service-based business, you just got to find your, so I think that was always going to be, like I remember I had this girlfriend in law school, and we went home with her, to her folks for Thanksgiving or something, or Christmas, and I was talking to her dad, and her dad was like a bigwig in one of these insurance companies, and this was like right before we graduated, right? This is like December, we graduated in May, and she already's got a job in some kind of law firm or whatever, and it comes to me, and he's like, well, where are you gonna work? And I'm like, I'm gonna start my own firm. He's like, you need to work somewhere else for 2 years first, and I'm like, you don't get to tell me that. I mean, I'm trying to be cool because you're my girlfriend's dad, but you don't get to tell me that, Again, this is uninformed optimism, if you follow Alex Hermosi. Like, I just didn't, you don't know what you don't know. It was a million times harder than I ever thought it would be. But it was also awesome, it was so much fun. You're in your office the first couple, nights, and I'm in this sleazy part of Princess Street, and I'm upstairs. Like, you literally have to walk over homeless people to get there. It smelled, as you can imagine, and I'm in there, and it's a 3-room place. My mom would come from Morehead City, where I grew up, to pretend to be the secretary like one day a week, and leave her sweater there, so it would kind of look like she was at lunch the whole rest of the time, and she was at lunch for 4.5 days. And, but it was just like, but it was awesome. It was fun, it was fun, and it was exciting, and it was like, it meant something to the people I was working for. The people that I was representing, it meant something to them as to whether or not we were successful. And so that part was fun. I'm looking around at nighttime, I'm like working late, and I'm like, this is mine, I mean? I don't own the building. I barely own the furniture. The furniture is all stuff that somebody else had thrown away. I had a copier that some lawyer hustled me for $200, and I bought it blindly, and you had to reach your hand and risk electrocution to be able to copy the second page. But I mean, I will tell you that was fun. It was exciting, and it was like, and I made connections with people who I think are lifelong friends to this day. Through that process, it was pretty incredible. The way that I did that at the time, First Citizens Bank had a program they would loan you $25,000 to start, and so the journey of all entrepreneurs at that stage, and even at this stage, is can you make it off the ground before you run out of runway? So now we're trying to start, so we have this big expansion, we're trying to hire 30 more people and try to get to these different, I'm trying to launch Fayetteville, I'm trying to do some other things, and it's like, can I get to this place before, so I got balance in the financial piece of it as a whole, another show, for sure.
I know it's a little bit late now, but I wanted to ask, we have a lot of freshmen, sophomores, engineers who have experience in different firms and things like that. So I just wanted to see if there's anything at your firm or your Charlotte firm or the potential Fayetteville firm, if there is internships, shadowing opportunities, like just lunch and ask questions, like any of those opportunities for anybody.
So if we have specific opportunities for internships, I mean, they would be through our HR person. Our HR person would know about that. It really, in our stuff, I mean, Jeremiah's an intern in our place, but he didn't come for a summer. By a summer, it doesn't really do us any good. Like, by the time you learn what you're doing, you gotta go.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and our focus really is on, again, helping the injured people recover physically, financially, emotionally. So to the extent we can help other people on their journey, I mean, by all means, I'll come do this. I'll help you in any way I can. Like, one of the things I think you should do is you should have other people. I mean, first of all, I'd make this a podcast. Second of all, I'd have and make it available to everybody in the nation. Second of all, I'd invite a different person. I could give it 20 people who would come out here and talk to you and from different perspectives, different backgrounds. Several people from your firm, who I think would be phenomenal. And they'll give you a different perspective. And at the end of it, you would know, do I want to do what he does, she does, they do, or whatever, And I think that would be that would be helpful. So in terms of, stuff, we have a job posting on our website, speakslaw.com, and you can find whatever you want to find as far as, if we have internships available. If not, feel free to reach out to our HR person, which is Melissa. She will say if we have positions or whatever available. If it's for longer periods of time, then that probably makes more sense. So at any one time, just to give you an idea, we probably have 4 or 5 interns, working with us. And sometimes they go on to be, paralegals or whatever, or, and many of our, like our operations director, Abby, was started by demands for us when she was in college. She was an English major and she was in college. And she runs our operations now. So sure, yeah, just reach out to them.
Thanks.
Does your firm work with you providing victims that have sustained injuries due to a crash? Do you guys work with U visas, providing those immigrants with those?
So immigration is a whole different animal, and so we don't do that. We have people that, I can refer people to that for any purpose, and I know some very talented immigration lawyers. Usually they have national firms, people I'm familiar with, in Arizona, Oklahoma, New York. But yeah, so that's what be the circumstances. All right? All right, well, so I'm happy to come back. I'm happy to answer, we have a lot of the information we talked about, and mission, vision, values, and all that kind of stuff, which is the most important thing. People ask me about starting a firm or whatever, and they go, and I go, mission, vision, values, and they go, yeah, I get it, but what about the owl? And I'm like, mission, vision, values, and they go, yeah, but what about TV commercials? And then mission, vision, values. And what I really like to argue, if you're going to start a firm, the most important thing you will ever do is mission, vision, values. And if you want to learn more about that or whatever, our podcast is The Verdict. You can find it, Speak Law Firm, The Verdict. You can find stuff about our injured clients and their testimony and experience, affairs that I've had turned out to be blessings, and mission, vision, values, and goals, and how to start a business, the way you should start a business or not, and challenges and all that kind of stuff through our podcast. All right. But also, I would, if you found this at all beneficial, and whoever runs this, you can reach out to me or whatever, or any of you can, and I will connect you with other people that I think would be phenomenal guests. And I know several people would be. One person that comes to my mind, Leanne Quattrucci, I think would be
She's great.
Great person to have as a guest, and I think she's open, and she's generous, and she's smart, and she's fantastic. So, all right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
She
you.
is. She is.